So, afternoon, Michael. Welcome to our little chat about Think Like a CFO.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Not at all. So, you are both the corporate controller and the head of global business services for Amway. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I ended up in finance early in my career after international studies in business, and I really wanted to work with people about how do you take business decisions. So I wasn't really going into the accounting direction at all. And here I am in a role which is effectively dealing with a lot of the accounting across the whole globe, because that's our main remit within our GBS function. But since I worked with so many different people across the globe, but also in different industries, I'm passionate about what a business model really does and how do you make a business work. And I think that helps a lot to understand business processes and to see where you can make a bigger impact. And so that with that background, we've been able to change things and do things that made sense to the business, and also actually helped the GBS to stand up GBS more broadly across Amway. And so from that perspective, it's perfectly natural now for me to be in this role. Whereas if you would have started to tell me this 40 years ago or 30, or I was, let's say 25 years ago.
Younger than that, Michael.
Yeah. No, but I wasn't starting in this direction at all. And it wasn't until I worked with people from marketing, engineering together on how do you plan for a business and how do we resolve business issues. And you understand that the marketeer and the engineer speak very different language, but actually mean the same thing. And I was in the middle and trying to translate it between people. And I said, but you actually want the same thing. So can we now talk about how we get there? And then I could help them bring there. And so that's what my passion is about, is helping to get people together and try to make better business decisions. And that is a bit more about the reason why I probably got promoted to this GBS role, which is a good fit for me.
So it's funny you say about speaking different languages. It's also true that sometimes people in different disciplines use the same words but mean different things. So you got two sides of the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the perspective of where everyone comes from is always defined by their cultural background, but also a moment in time, right? And so it can be that you just don't have the same priorities at the same time. And so that makes our life in GBS not always easy, because we may think it's important, but our business partners don't think it's so important. And the ability to be able to translate it then to business impact makes a big difference if you can progress your projects or not. And that's why I do think that you can come from different domain expertise, whether it's in finance or another area, but you need to be able to understand what other people's priorities are and how you can work with them.
That's interesting. So it sounds like it's a lucky accident almost. You've ended up leading GBS, but it seems to me like it's given you additional perspectives over and above what you had before, even though in a corporate finance role, you've got a pretty broad view. What's been the most fulfilling aspect of being a GBS leader in a global business like Amway?
Amway, to start with, is the most international company I ever worked for. Because imagine a business where less than 10% of the sales comes from the home market. Yeah. And most American multinational companies have a fair share of their business in their home market. And here we are working across the whole globe in over 80 countries and territories. And our business in the US is sizable, but it's not the biggest business. And so we need to work in a very entrepreneurial driven business also with our distributors that determine themselves how they want to develop their business. And that means that we're continuously looking at what makes most sense to them and how can we support them best on their journey. And what I find really fulfilling is when we get to a point where we feel we've improved the process, we get feedback that people say the experience is better, and we can see the results of that. And so for me, the most fulfilling thing is really that we can start a discussion, get people on the same page, and then make progress. That is most fulfilling as a GBS leader. And we've made some great successes, and I'm sure we can make further work in Amway still, because there's plenty of opportunity across the globe. We've developed in a pretty organic way over the past 65 years, and that leaves then a lot of opportunity to improve processes and to work on things that adopt to the modern times and the digital environment, and there's a lot of opportunity for GBS people to help understand the process and define a better solution for the future.
Great, yeah. So we've talked before about your work in helping your team of global process owners and broader team in GBS to deliver greater business value by approaching things outside in. And we had a long discussion about that. We spent many times discussing it. What does it mean to you? What does the outside in mean to you?
So outside in for me starts really by looking, what does this actually matter? What will the impact be that we see, the business outcome be that we get out of this, but also to get ourselves inspired by what do we see out in the market, in other industries, as great solutions that could possibly be also a great solution to our problems that we have. And as we developed our GBS, we created a global process ownership organization from within, from people who have a deep understanding of our business processes, who have been operationally very often working on them. And then we grew people to become a subject matter expert and then a process owner. And so we have a variety of people with different backgrounds, but many of them have really had solid operational experience. And what is great about that is that you get that a lot of continuous improvement ideas, a lot of inside-out thinking. And I think if you combine that with the outside-in thinking, then they become also more complete in terms of what kind of business impact they can make, how they can better connect to this business stakeholders. Because the risk is, when you reason from an inside-out perspective, is that you're going to try to improve parts of the process until you meet, at some moment in time, a barrier. And that barrier may be a stakeholder, it may be a system, it may be and then you want to change the system, or you want to convince the stakeholder, and they say, but why do you want to do this? And if you then say, because then I can do my process better,
yeah,
then they say, well, so what's in it for me? I say, well, it will be better for you. What will be better for me? And we need to be prepared for that answer. And if you start with outside-in thinking, then you've already worked on what's in it for the stakeholder. So when you meet the stakeholder, ideally a bit earlier than before you were hitting the wall, they're on board and they are supportive of the journey. And you may want to not start a journey because you know that the stakeholder is not supportive, and therefore it's not the right time yet. It doesn't mean you don't need to be prepared, but you know that you can manage your timing better to be there. So having a good combination of outside in and inside out thinking is golden, I think, to process transformation.
It's interesting you say that, because I think in every job role and every function, there's always a tendency, almost a necessity, to focus on the machinery of the job, which by definition is inside out. And so we tend to, people tend to spend 70% of the time or more looking at the machinery, and that blinds you a little bit to the outside in perspective. So I guess it's important to focus people on that specifically.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we're also, that comes back to that perspective, is that we see the benefit of it, and the other party doesn't see that yet. And if we can create a bigger topic around something rather than the smaller topic where we try to improve our process, then that also makes a big difference. So it also gives us access to seeing the bigger picture, tying it to the strategy of the company or a business unit that you're trying to support, better understanding them, and make sure that the solution that we're developing is therefore sticky and will really bring the benefit as we thought it would.
Right. So you've also encouraged your team to think like a CFO. Can you talk me through why that matters and what that means?
Sure, yeah, it's a little colored by my background as a CFO, but I often run into topics that people say, yes, it would be good. And then you try to define what good looks like. And as a CFO, what looks good is what is the return on investment?
Mhm.
And that's not always a very easy question to respond to. A lot of the improvements that we make are at risk of staying invisible. And therefore, to measure the true impact is then also quite difficult. If I save an hour of someone's work, what do they do with that? How do we reinvest it? And so what you often will hear when you are with other CFOs or when you are a CFO is that you start to talk about hard savings and soft savings. Right? And people say, well, there's a lot of soft savings. But what does it do to the P&L? What does it do to the cash flow? How do we get there? And I think that is where thinking like a CFO matters, because it forces the team to bring things like the outside-in perspective to a more strategic level of the enterprise. Where does it make a difference, and how can we do that? And that means that people start to feel accountable as well for these results.
Yeah.
And once they feel accountable, they react differently, and then they take a different approach even to their day-to-day work. So it's a very profound change when it happens. Now, if the reality of cost savings was just about that, and you can demonstrate them, etc., it would be easy. But people want to understand why you're doing things. And as I said earlier, if you don't convince people about it, you run into a barrier of change. And then having also a financial benefit that is clearly demonstrable is difficult to refuse. I often say I still need to see a good business case getting denied when there was a real benefit to the enterprise. If it's well articulated, many of those cases get implemented, even if there's a fight for resources, because it was so well articulated. So it does help our team to actually get better prepared in presenting a case for change, getting maybe access to the technology people that they need, and to make those changes really happen.
And it's your reference to hard benefits and soft benefits is interesting, because it encourages us to take those soft benefits and find a route to how does that hit the P&L eventually, how does it hit working capital eventually, because all of those soft benefits are when we describe them, we say they're good things because, and eventually that's going to flow in, but it forces people to think through, how does that actually hit?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you look at outside in and CFO thinking, how do they help your team engage with stakeholders across a business? Does it have an impact? Does it either have an impact to how they feel about it or the results they get, or both?
Yeah, no, it impacts. How do we define who is really into that process? I mean, what we see is that people define their process all of a sudden in a far broader way, because they look for stakeholders that could really get impacted and that where things are going to change for them. And we try to look for confirmation from those stakeholders as well that they have seen the benefit. When we work on a refund process and do that faster, we do ask our customer services if they see the difference. I mean, do they get less calls about people saying, where's the refund? How do we inform the people that want the refund that they have gotten that, and so forth? So it queries far more, how do you really measure the outcome and the result? And who do you then talk to validate that? And so it brings, instead of ourselves saying, well, we saved so many hours, we're going to look at maybe we saved someone else hours, or what do they think of the quality of the process? Do they think it's the same? Is it better?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the improvements that GBS organizations are also talking about is when you talk, for instance, about shift left thinking, where you move things back to the upstream part of the process. And that's not always lived in a very positive way by those that receive that activity.
Right.
But if you can explain why you do that, and if they are on board with it, it makes life so much easier. If they're not on board with it, it will only lead to more complaints, because now they feel that they have to do more work. They didn't understand that picking up things at the end of the process as a defect is more costly to the enterprise than if you actually prevent that defect earlier. And if you never explain that to people and you don't work with them, then it's going to be difficult. Now, it doesn't mean that thinking outside in and CFO thinking makes you very popular in getting things done, because it's not because you talk about it that people are convinced. And so but it brings us a step closer to having more business impact, having more understanding and empathy for what other people are doing, and see how we can influence it, and then hopefully get to build better business outcomes.
That's a great point. I mean, you touched on it there, that it's there's one thing to behave in a certain way, but we've also got to execute. So you can have all of the models of thinking and paradigms, but you've got to have that execution muscle as well. So can you share some examples of where this thinking and this approach is creating or accelerating business value in terms of P&L or working capital?
Well, I was very pleasantly surprised when someone in our team came up with the idea about, hey, there are credit notes here. We need to go after those earlier, than we usually do. And they really saw the financial benefit of that. So they articulated it with, this is the financial benefit if we go after this, and this will bring more working capital. And the regular process is not good enough. And so they brought money back earlier to the business. So
Right.
that's a very simple way for them to actually get an improvement going that is financially relevant. But in the larger scheme of things, we also managed to, when we managed to do an organizational change, for instance, in Europe, when my remit as a CFO for Europe was to set up better business decision support, implement a shared service center, and then implement an ERP system. And the business case for that was not just about finance. It was also about, how do we organize Europe as a region? And with my colleagues, whether they were in marketing or in sales or in logistics, or they were all working towards the same business model that we were trying to change, the same business model change that we're trying to improve. And so if you are able to work together and say, this is a business case that is bigger than just the improvement for one function, then I think you really get there as well, because then there's a P&L benefit that goes beyond the initial saving. It thinks about, how do we really improve processes across different functions. And so when we're setting up our multifunctional shared service center in Krakow, it was really a collective effort that delivered savings that were sustainable over time and led to better processes being executed as well at a higher quality. And so I think that having a very clear P&L view, not just for a process improvement, but also about how do you change your organization, is very important. And when our team sees that we can actually make a difference if we move more things in a consistent way forward, then we get to beautiful things. So one of the outcomes that we now have is that we do accounting across all our businesses globally in a consistent way, and that GBS is accountable for the statutory and the tax compliance. And that we went a very far way in getting there, and we have an agreement with the business that works and that is sustained every year, and that where we see that many people appreciate how qualitative things have become, and it operates at a far lower cost than we had before. So
Right.
I think those agreements with other stakeholders are extremely key. And if we can articulate the business case, then we can really deliver it. And we developed that business case together also with my colleague of tax and treasury. And we've really implemented a really good way of working that strengthens business decision support, strengthens the ability of tax and treasury, creates also a GBS model that is more consistent in nature across the business. And so we worked on this, and we really improved it as a group of people together. And I think that our North Star was this business case that we put in front of ourselves. So that was also another example where outside in thinking and thinking like a CFO makes a difference.
Yeah. That's interesting, because you talked about almost that end-to-end thinking, but cross-functionally allowed you to win hearts and minds to create that European business model, which was different than it was before.
Yeah, and that leads to an understanding of business process at a more aggregate level that helped then also to work on harmonization across the different countries. And so we went from a very decentralized model in 2010 to a fairly centralized European model today.
Okay. So you've also described the fact you've got some table stakes efficiency gain targets in GBS, so internal efficiency gains. Is that benefiting from this approach as well, or is that regarded as a separate improvement?
Yeah, I mean, our table stakes efficiencies are, we do set ourselves a target to annually improve. And so a lot of that is related to continuous improvement, but also to our roadmaps that we develop. And our roadmaps can only happen if we get agreement with the business about bigger changes we make. So, and these roadmaps get developed over and executed maybe over 2 or 3 years. And so it's essential that we use the same approach, because if we have something bigger like this that we try to implement and we don't have that agreement about what good will look like and where we need to move to, then we're investing a lot of time on something that we cannot realize. So I do think that we do get to faster transformation as we engage in stakeholders earlier, and we think more about change management in an earlier stage. And so that really leads to also for the table stakes, if you like, to be delivered in a more sustainable way.
Right. So that's, I really appreciate that, Michael. It's a lot to think about. Have you got any other final thoughts you'd like to share with your colleagues about your experiences around this, this way of thinking, this way of operating? Because you've certainly seems to have brought this, this collaboration together across the business, which is impressive.
Well, we can still learn, and we learn every day. It's a never-ending journey, because it's not because we've booked some successes in some areas that we cannot book others, and that we shouldn't be staying vigilant to who is really involved in the process, who are we really helping, what are the benefits that come out of this, and are those benefits also strategically relevant to the company? And if they are, then you have a great foundation to improve, and I think that helps. But you can never. We need to take this with humility, but also with patience sometimes, that we want to change things, but we need to choose actually when is the right moment for change. Not every project is the right moment to start immediately. Sometimes it just takes a bit longer. And investing that time into understanding your stakeholders better will actually get you there faster, even if it may seem at times that it's a closed door. I do think that this approach also allows us to better understand the stakeholders and to prepare the more difficult journeys for when the stars are aligning, and because of the conversations we're having, maybe those stars are aligning fast.
Great. So it sounds a little bit like patience and courage are 2 additional qualities we need.
Yes, I do think so. And and seeing ourselves at the service of the business. And I don't mean that in a servant type of nature. I mean that more that we're enabling the business to be successful.
Yeah.
And that's how we should see our role. We should not see our role as taking over activities from others and pretending that we know how to do it better. We need to make sure that we work with the business to make them successful.
No, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Michael van der Ploeg. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.